Topic in this order: Academies of Science, Inquiry-Based Science Education and Sustainable Development Goals. As I go through, you'll see I'll flip a little bit these two topics, but I hope that makes it a more sort of fluid presentation. So, IAP, I think you've heard a lot about it this week, but maybe you don't really understand yet who we are and our structure, and I'm not sure I do, but I'll try and explain it as best as I can. So, we are essentially a network of member academies. This provides the sort of foundation for everything we do. Our member academies, they have elections to provide executive committees for all these things that go higher up the chain. So we have more than 130 members. They're academies of medicine and academies of science. They themselves are grouped into 4 regional networks, so for the Asia Pacific, Europe, the Americas, and Africa. And the Inter-Academy Partnership itself brings together 3 pillars. Now, these were, and to a certain degree still are, 3 separate organizations. You might have heard this IAP for Science was called once upon a time the Inter-Academy Panel when it was set up in the 1990s. This was the Inter-Academy Medical Panel, and this was the Inter-Academy Council. So we had a sort of external review, and they decided this was very confusing and we ought to sort of try and redesign ourselves and rebrand ourselves. So this is how we've come up with the Inter-Academy Partnership as a sort of umbrella organization. So myself, I'm responsible for coordinating these to the health and the science aspects based in Trieste. The IAP for Research is hosted at the US National Academies in Washington, DC. So I hope you all realize exactly what an academy is, but some audiences that I speak to don't, so I've put in this slide. They are essentially honorific societies that bring together the top brains, the best minds in the country, whether they're scientists, engineers, social scientists, and so on. They are typically, not always, sort of independent from government, but usually government funded. So the US example is a classic one that is actually in the statutes. When I think it was Abraham Lincoln created it, he says, we're going to give you this money, this annual funding, but we're not going to interfere with what you do. We want you to advise us and give us your best opinion, science advice, and we won't try and influence that. And they are therefore highly credible organizations with links to expertise, and they form this link between the scientific community and policymakers at national and international levels. So each national academy has links with its own government, and the network itself, sort of more and more, we're getting involved at sort of UN levels, UN discussions, and so on. Okay, so where are our members? We are pretty well represented in much of the world. We're lacking a little bit in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa. I think this is an older map, and we're continually talking with new countries and adding new academies. Thanks to the French Academy, Algeria has now set up an academy in the last couple of years. September the 8th, a few days from now, they'll have the first enrollment or the first induction ceremony for the Zambian Academy of Sciences. So we're continually growing our network, and we hope to take a while to fill in some of these gaps. And like I said, we have these regional networks that are very active, especially in reaching out to those countries where there's no current academy. Okay, so moving on to the Sustainable Development Goals. We've spoken about them a little bit in this meeting, and they were raised certainly in the joint meeting that we had. There are 17 of them signed up to by national governments. I think all governments signed up to them in 2015. They will run to 2030. And I think they've become sort of very iconic, if you like, because of this iconic picture, this picture of icons. And certainly two of them are really the focus of the meeting we have today: quality education and climate action. But science itself, we talk about science education, it really underpins many of these: zero hunger, good health and well-being. Gender equality, I think, also underpins what we're trying to do in science education and elsewhere. But we're talking about science involved in water, energy, infrastructure, sustainable cities, everything. You know, science is there. And the last one, number 17, partnerships for the goals. And I think the representation we have in this room is a perfect example. We understand that we can't address these issues on our own. Our organizations have to work together. We have to collaborate in order to address any of these, either individually or collectively. So, as well as agreeing the 17 goals, the countries that signed up to this development agenda agreed 169 individual targets. And these were broken down, sort of each goal had a number of targets to attain by 2030. And this is just a sample for health-related goals to show how there is a lot of cross-cutting and cross-referencing between the different goals. So you see, obviously, number 3 is good health and well-being. A lot of the targets for health relate to number 3, but also ending poverty, food security. I don't know if you can read this, but it is putting an end to malnutrition, obviously a major health target. Clean water and sanitation obviously has big impacts on health as well. So you see that this has been sort of well mapped out. I'm not sure if this has been done for the climate goal, but I'm sure that a similar pattern would emerge, and that targets for other goals would impact positively on the climate goal. Okay, but the SDGs themselves, I just wanted to highlight a quote from this Darryl Copeland. He's a former Canadian diplomat. He's written a book called Guerrilla Diplomacy. He always has interesting things to say if you follow his blog. But here, despite many countries' massive expenditure on military resources, which continues to go on year after year after year, the major challenges facing the world today, including climate change, climate change, emerging diseases, poverty, they cannot be solved by military intervention. So this is maybe when we talk about economics there, we need to sort of restructure the way we spend our national budgets as well. There's so much going on the military expenditure, whereas the real challenges are these issues. And what makes them challenging? I'm going to take the example of water here. We have 3 types of problems. We have simple problems. These are things that science can address very easily. We want to get water from the river here up to the fields to irrigate the fields. Even Archimedes, 2,000 odd years ago, came up with this device. It's relatively simple, it moves water. Okay, we can do that, it's easy. Science can also deal with complicated problems. We want to bring water to a city. We want everybody to be able to have a shower in the morning, flush the toilet. Guy on the 15th floor of a multi-story block of flats, he wants the same water pressure as the guy on the ground floor. It's complicated. We need to take into account reservoirs, pumping stations, purification, filtration, adding chlorine, keeping the balance right, all these things, dealing with the waste, recycling the waste. But it's doable. We can do it. We can break it down into simple parts. We can put the parts back together. We can build these complicated systems. That's not a problem. Science can do it. But then we come to more complex problems. Okay, we have the city here. We have its water supply. But there's the farmers here. They want their share of it. There's the fishermen. They want to take clean, sort of healthy, nutritious fish from the river. They don't want the industry here to that wants to cool its turbines or whatever and pump its waste into the river. The fishermen don't want that. Maybe there's people up here in the lake that like to go swimming and yachting, and in between that we have variations in weather and climate. Maybe the runoff one year is wetter than the next, drier than the next. We have different competing interests for the water. And this is where we have these complex problems. This is where, and again, it touches on the discussions we've been having. Science alone is not enough. We bring in economic issues, social issues, diplomacy, trade-offs, and all this. And I think this is where we've talked about building, constructing these modules and curricula for climate change education as well. We understand that we need to go much beyond the inquiry-based science education that perhaps we've started with. And there's a terminology for these complex systems. They're called wicked systems, for good reason. And here, this is a slide I use regularly, but you see climate change is right at the top. I haven't moved it just for this presentation. But other transboundary issues, they're also sort of wicked because they affect more than one country. They go beyond national boundaries. And I would argue that the 17 Sustainable Development Goals are all wicked issues. We need more than science to solve them. Okay, so where does IAP come in? As I said, we have this network of academies. We have this umbrella partnership. This partnership has 4 strategic priorities. The academies signed up to these a couple of years ago. One is to build a scientifically literate global society, and this is where our science education program comes in. We want to provide evidence-based advice and perspectives on global issues, especially sort of scientific issues. We think we have the scientific expertise to be able to look at emerging and current issues and provide sort of updates, relevant updates, recommendations to governments and policymakers. We want to strengthen the global scientific enterprise. We do this by supporting young scientists, women in science, talking about responsible research practices and so on. I won't really go into that. And we want to strengthen the global network, and I touched on that, building new academies and getting sort of more global coverage. So our scientific education program, it's been running since 2003. It's had 3 chairs till now. Bruce Albert's here, many of you will recognize it, even if you don't know him. The second chair was sitting here in the front row, Pierre Lehner. And then the third one, I don't know if you see her, Dato Lee Yi Chong of Malaysia is the current chair. And since 2003, through this program, our academy members have really been sort of pushing, trying to promote, roll out, convince governments to look into this inquiry-based science education. But we're also starting to tackle this idea of science literacy, thinking about science museums, reaching out to adults, getting them engaged in scientific topics, understanding more, so that they can also make sort of rational decisions on things that affect them. Strategic priority 2 is this one based on providing evidence-based advice, and we have several mechanisms for doing this. One of them is the production of reports. So these are real heavyweight documents that may take a year, 2 years, 3 years to produce. Here's one I touched on, responsible conduct in research. And this one, Jean José mentioned the other day. This is the report, a review of the processes and procedures of the IPCC. It was after this Himalayan glaciers, the controversy and so on, that the whole process was reviewed by IAC in those days, what is now IAP for research. And these reports, often requested by the Director General of the United Nations, are sometimes really quite high up, and they are presented to those organizations at the conclusion of the report. The other strategy we have for reaching sort of governments, UN officials and so on, is the release of statements. And these are very short, concise documents. You see some of the examples we've produced here, again on topical issues that are sort of emerging, synthetic biology. This was presented to the Convention on Biological Diversity when it was having a big meeting. Antimicrobial resistance is an ongoing thing in the World Health Organization. And it's important. A statement for us is a very specific document that goes through a specific process of development. And the last step of that process is official endorsement by our member academies. So once it has reached more than 50% of our members endorsing the statement, then it is sort of finally released to the public and to the policymakers and so on. Without giving too much away, there is a statement on climate change education going through that. It's not at this stage yet, but it's under development, and we hope by December the 12th and the big climate change conference in Paris, we'll be able to have something that we can present that will support as well the work that we're trying to do today. So here I mentioned the chairs of our sort of global, or our science education program has been led by various people through the years. Jorge Allende, I didn't mention earlier. So these people chair a global council and get input from an international advisory board. And these people you see here in the global council. Carol is here with us this week, but I'm sure many of you know several of the others on the council. So they meet once a year and sort of generate policy, advise activities for the coming year and so on. And it's supported with the regional networks that we have. The Global Young Academy is engaged, and this is where I come in, trying to sort of hold it all together. And then the members of the Global Council, the Advisory Board, are often council members that have rotated off. So this is a sort of growing list of experts that we want to keep engaged and keep working with. Sort of Yves Carré, I'm sure many of you know here. This was actually a photo I took at a presentation of Le Map to the Director General of UNESCO in Paris last year. So it was another attempt, I think a meeting that was promoted very strongly by our co-chair, or our chair of the Global Council from Malaysia, Dato Lee, who was instrumental in setting this up. Okay, I think I can skip this slide for this audience. It's just more examples from some of the activities that we've held over the years in Malaysia, in Sudan earlier this year, in Chile last year, and at the Thailand National Science Festival last year also. It was a big display on mosquitoes that we had. So some of the accomplishments, we've been very effective, I think. Hold on, go back a little bit. Promoting inquiry-based science education. In fact, coming out in the next couple of weeks is a book written by YANAS, the network of American academies, sort of chapter by chapter, what each country has done, promoting IBSI in their countries. And for my Latin American colleagues, it won't be released at a meeting in Uruguay, it'll be in Cordoba in Argentina, I think the first week of November, and I still have to send you the advanced copy. We have a biennial conference. I mentioned the one in Chile. There was the photo of the previous one in China. We have regional conferences. There's Africa, European, Mediterranean academies for science education. So they've been very active, linking sort of north-south. And in some of the breakout groups, I've mentioned this initiative of EMASI to try and start creating science houses for professional development and teacher training. This is something that's ongoing. We've come up with declarations and recommendations very often after our meetings or conferences, and publications. So here's one after our Beijing conference in 2014, a sort of declaration that was presented again to UNESCO and to others to really sort of keep pushing this idea that inquiry-based education, STEM education is very important. Okay, and coming back to EMASE, you see it's been going since 2014, meetings in Rome. We have the Minister of Education of Sudan present at the time, and that actually led to the Sudan meeting that we had earlier this year. We had one then in Dakar, we one coming up in Paris next month. You see the presentations and things are all available online if you want to go back and look at some of these. With regards to publications, we have these two, I would call major ones, Principles and Big Ideas of Science Education, and then Working with Big Ideas in Science Education. What we try to do as well is we send these round to our academies and we ask volunteers amongst those academies to assist with translations. So we've translated this one into Chinese, French, Spanish, I think Serbian, Russian, Arabic, you name it. So, and these are all listed on our website for free download, and I think this is a kind of model, I think, that we want to try and work with as we develop some of these curricula. So there's a checking that box, what can science academies do? In the alternative title, this is one thing where we can help, I think. And this is the book that I've just shown you in the middle of the previous slide. This is Dato Lee from Malaysia with the editor of the book, Win Harlan, presenting it to the Irina Bokova, the Director General of UNESCO. So, although UNESCO, it is science, education and culture, and we've been fighting many years when we try and push science education to the scientists there, they say, oh, this is education. And then we go to the education people and say, no, this is science. And we get kind of stuck between the silos in UNESCO. So the tactic was to go straight to the top, and hopefully that'll filter down. So whether it's working, I don't know. But I think we probably need to push in all three directions. You can see Juan Carlos nodding over here. Okay, so another activity of the science education program is trying to build on this One Belt, One Road initiative of the Chinese government, and to try and start to link the science histories of the different cultures of India, of China, of the Arab region and so on. And there was a workshop recently in China, sort of trying to bring these different ideas together. And again, the idea is to sort of create mutual understanding, confidence in people that their cultures have contributed to global science. It's seen very much as a sort of Western-dominated, Western-led activity now, science in general, research, but I think that there's many things for all nations to take pride in, and this is the sort of core concept of this sort of theme of the science education program. And then we have a core active group that was able to react very quickly, I think. We met in Chile in March last year, just as the Zika epidemic was sort of on the rise and hitting the news. The World Health Organization had just called it what was the terminology of global concern, an outbreak of global concern. So we very quickly were able to collect a lot of material, a lot of information, leaflets, brochures, posters, didactic material for school children, modules, and we pulled all this together. And we were also very fortunate to get to have Bruce Alberts there, who got funding from the Moore Foundation to start really with the Smithsonian Science Education Center, to start thinking about developing sort of modules and curricula to teach children about mosquitoes, mosquito-borne diseases, how they can protect themselves, how they spread, what they can do in their local context to improve their situation. You know, knowledge is power, sort of thing, even at 4 or 5 years old. So this is something that's a project being led by the Smithsonian. It's been going on, it's still continuing, and as it's developed, it's expanded. I think Carol will back me up on this, from an inquiry-based science education program to an inquiry-based community science experience. So, and again, it brings in these wicked issues now that are essential. It's not just science. We need to go to society and have trade-offs. There's economics, there's different organizations, and the health department, the water department, sanitation, there's the mayor and the cities and the state level, and all these things. They're all important players in reacting to mosquito-borne diseases in whatever community that you're working in. And this is a sort of schematic of the development phases. We're up to here now. From October, we are going to start sort of trials, really sort of take it into the classroom, see how it works as a sort of the beta edition of the modules. This will be done in the US, but we're also looking for other English-speaking nations at the moment. So if anybody wants to take this home to their country and trial it out, we'll be writing to our academies in the next few days to get sort of some volunteer countries, some sort of expertise in those countries to test it out for us. And the idea, at least in this current phase of the project, is to sort of take this feedback, revise it, and test the Spanish version as well. So we'll have English and Spanish, but obviously as time goes on, we'll work with our academies to get it into French, Portuguese, we hope, and whatever other languages we can, actually, and to adapt it to local situations and so on and so on. So, and I think this is a good model as well. This is a first trial run, but the climate change education, if we're producing modules, could follow something like this. And this obviously answers Sustainable Development Goal number 3 about good health and well-being, and a sort of ambitious idea is the IAP and the Smithsonian and other partners work together to address each of the different Sustainable Development Goals. It might take us beyond 2030 to do that, I don't know, but let's see. At least we get there. Okay. Just some nice pictures. So coming round again to climate change education, I just wanted to highlight, this is not related to academies and so on. It's a project I just came across recently called Drawdown. This is, they identified and researched and modeled the 100 most substantive existing solutions to address climate change. And you can see some of them here: wind turbines onshore, tropical forests, temperate forests, peatlands, and so on. I just wanted to highlight the 6th most important one by their analysis was educating girls. And this is to do, again, with family planning, reducing family sizes and population growth and all these knock-on effects. So I would like to argue that science education of girls is built into here, and I think we can have a big effect. Okay, just to sum up then, we have the science with regard to sort of climate change education. We have the IPCC reports. We have the sort of credibility of the science academies as well. What hasn't actually been said, I don't think, in this workshop yet, is that we have a representative of the IPCC based in Trieste alongside in another building, but we meet now and again regularly. So we're having good discussions. So we're trying to sort of make this link in Trieste. So we have a series of wicked problems to address, of which climate change is one of them. And I think we realize that a sort of multidisciplinarity, education for the goals through partnerships is essential for us to tackle these problems for the next generation, generations that follow. So with curricula developed, tested with Science Academy's help, sort of translated, adapted to local contexts, etc. I hope we can have sort of happy hearts, happy children, happy planet, and I leave you with that happy image. Okay, thank you.